Hi, Giuseppe. He loves me.
We're live.
All right. Well, welcome back to Talk Recovery on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. A little correction. This is not Jane Says. This has been Caught Stealing by Jane's Addiction. Classic. And I'm sure we've all been caught stealing sitting in this room, but I'll only speak for myself.
I never got caught.
Oh, no. Anyways, we are back in time for a little Facebook Live. Hello, all of you out there watching and trying to listen. It might not be as good as it is on the radio, but here we are in studio, and we're going right into our personal story. And we are here with Cassia today in studio, so take it over to the personal stories.
Hey, welcome to Facebook Live. I'm Frances. I'm having fun today. Cassie is here to share her personal story about recovering from an eating disorder, which is super serious, and please don't mistake my happiness for anything.
Totally
yes, fine. But so tell me a little bit about yourself. What happened? How did you develop an eating disorder? What did that look like?
Well, I'm also a recovering addict, so I think that definitely has to do with it. I think that one of my first addictions was food, and it was just like a coping mechanism. Some traumatic stuff went on when I was a kid, and I don't think anyone really knew about it, and just as a way to cope, it was food, or it was lack of food. And I think growing up, addiction's a family disease, and so luckily my parents didn't use drugs, but because of that, the family disease aspect of it, we had different coping mechanisms, and part of that was through food. And so I just remember being a kid, and like my mom would make cookies, and I think, who's stealing the cookies out of the cookie jar? It's like a common kid thing, but I just remember, and I think it's normal for kids to like want to be like, no, I didn't. But I was so adamant. My mom would be like, I know you took a cookie out of the cookie jar. I was like, no, I didn't. I didn't at all. And I think when I kind of reflect back, that's obviously, I see the denial in that, even as a small child. And I was bullied as a kid. I was not a fit girl, and I think my childhood was a bit traumatic when in school, being called names. The whale. I remember going to school, and a kid behind me was like, "Watch out for the whale," and so I just had a distorted image of myself from a very young age. Once I went into high school, my eating disorder kind of switched from overeating to starving myself. And I remember thinking of it as a game to see how little food I could eat in a day. And with that, I just remember getting the positive feedback. Like, people would be like, oh, you're losing so much weight. Like, what are you doing? And I was like, this is amazing. People would be, I remember sitting on a lap of my friend and her saying, your butt is really bony. And I just remember thinking how big of a compliment that was. Mm. And I didn't really understand the seriousness of it. I had people around me, my family, why don't you eat your food? You eat like a bird. And I'm just like, yes, keep these going. This is a compliment to me. And so when I was around 17, I started getting into, actually that's not true. When I was 14, I started using drugs, and I think that's when I started to switch my addiction over to using, and it's just kind of was that cycle until, yeah, it was a cycle. I would stop using drugs for a bit, and then I would switch over to my eating disorder. And I just remember, I dropped out of school when I was 17. I moved to Calgary, and I think that's where my eating disorder got really bad. Again, with the games, I would be like, let's see if I can eat less than 500 calories a day. People would be like, wow, I could see your rib cage. And
so you took all these things as compliments. And
Yeah.
so at what point did you get help for your addiction in terms of drugs or alcohol, or did you get help for the eating disorder? A lot of women that come in for help for drugs or alcohol will often have their eating disorder manifest or present itself as soon as they stop drinking or doing drugs. It's all of a sudden now they're eating everything, and then they gain a lot of weight, and then they're already struggling with their self-image, and then they gain a bunch of weight, and now they go back to using sometimes, where even with quitting smoking, with people, they gain weight, and because their self-image and self-esteem is so tied to each other, it's like we go back to using. So did you come in for drug and alcohol, and then the eating disorder presented itself, or?
I came in for drugs and alcohol.
Right.
I did try. I was admitted to inpatient treatment for my eating disorder before I got clean. And that didn't really help because I was still using drugs, and I kept on getting hospitalized, and they'd be like, well, there's a ton of drugs in your system. And anyways, I got clean when I was 20.
Yay.
Thank you. Yeah.
How many years is that?
It'll be 11 years in November.
That's amazing. And you never went back? Like 20, boom,
Yeah.
wrapped it up?
I was done.
Wow, that's amazing. Good for you.
Thank you. I got clean when I was 20. I got clean in a recovery house, so my meals were regimented and the snack times were done for me, so I didn't really have an issue.
You didn't sneak into the fridge at night?
No.
They do that,
Oh, I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it at all. But it wasn't until I was 3 years clean that I kind of hit a bottom with my eating. I just remember eating until I threw up.
Mm.
And I was having a hard time walking up hills. I'd quit smoking.
What is that about? Have you made a connection, like, as a part of your recovery? What is that about when you eat until you throw up? Like, I heard it said in a poem one time, I eat until I hate myself.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think, the shame I still lived in, working through the shame of being an addict. But I still had that trauma from when I was a kid. And it was like a way for me to control and a way for me to self-abuse. That's all I could. It was just such a lack of love. And it was one way where I could still hurt and live in that victimization of myself. And I just got to the point, like with drugs, where I was like, there's a different way. Like, I have a choice. NA gave me a choice. The program's given me a choice. It helped me realize that I can choose. I'm like 100% responsible for my life. Mm-hmm. And I hit a bottom. That was like, I started writing the steps about it. And then I lapsed in my behavior, and it became about the starvation and and just that stuff. And then I tried different 12-step programs, but it wasn't right for me. So I actually got admitted into outpatient treatment, and that was kind of the beginning of my healing.
So what work, in sort of like a practical way, maybe for somebody that's listening that's really struggling with this, what type of work did you do around your eating disorder? Did you connect why you ate or didn't eat, and like, how did you work recovery around eating?
Well, to me, recovery is about love. Like, Narcotics Anonymous, for me, the program is about love, and it's about community, and the steps really teach me how to love myself and others, like from that unconditional place. And so for me, it was learning to love myself, and that I was deserving of love. And, with the outpatient treatment and with working the steps through Narcotics Anonymous, it's just learning how to accept myself for who I am, not having to be somebody else.
So what does that look like, just in like kind of a practical way? Because I know what you're talking about, I totally do. But maybe somebody listening that isn't a part of a 12-step program or a part of their own recovery journey may not be familiar with what do you mean. So like, say you're feeling feelings that normally you would either starve yourself or eat too much. So what do you do instead? Like, how do you practice recovery in that moment? When you're feeling a sense of shame or low self-worth or whatever, what do you actually physically do?
One thing that I've learned is that I can choose my next thought. Like, I'm powerless over my first thought. So if my first thought is shame or self-hatred, if I stop and I breathe and I remember that I am worthy, then I can choose my next thought. And it's really hard. Like, I didn't all of a sudden have that skill, but mindfulness, talking with people who understood what was going on, like other people who had eating disorders, really helped me. And just, oh man, so it's such a long time ago that it's hard for me to remember. Yeah, I think it was about learning those mindfulness techniques and like writing, journaling a lot. And like, one thing that I still practice is that I do a kudos book. I write in the book of like, what's the next loving thing that I did for myself today.
You do that every day?
Every day, yeah.
What's the next loving thing that I'm going to do for myself?
That I've done.
Oh,
like,
that you did today.
Day. Yeah.
So maybe at the end of your day, you would write about that. Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
And I like that idea of like, we don't have control over our first thought. Like, there's a saying like, first thought wrong.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
We don't have control over that first thought, but we can, like, we can influence the next thought. I like that idea. And I appreciate you sharing this part of your life with us. And I do know that there's so many women that that struggle with it, and men as well.
Absolutely.
But what does recovery from an eating disorder look like in terms of like, do you think of food differently now? Do you think of yourself differently now? Do you still, like, for me, I struggle with alcohol, so like I still don't go to parties where there's alcohol. I don't go to liquor stores and hang out. not that I ever did that. But you can't escape food though. Like, that's the thing, right? Like, I can avoid cigarettes for the most part. I can avoid a lot of things, but you can't avoid food.
Yeah.
So you really have to change your relationship with it. So how were you able to do that, and what does that look like today?
Well, like recovery, everyone's program is individual. I know some people who like don't eat sugar, and that really works for them. For me personally, it's about my relationship with myself. When everything that I'm in relation with is going to be affected by my relationship with myself and my spirituality. So for me, I've really learned to realize that the food isn't the problem. The food isn't bad.
Right.
So it's just about my relationship with food, I think.
So, and in order to sort of like nurture that relationship, I would imagine that means connecting with friends, family, yourself through writing, like the things that you've talked about. So I really want to thank you for being on the show today. Is there anything you want to say before you go for anyone that might, need a word of encouragement or?
Yeah. It's a lifelong journey. Like, I just want people, men and women, to just realize that it is possible and it's not black and white, and that you're loved if one day you binge and the next day you don't, or one day you starve and the next day you don't. Like, you're still doing amazing.
That's
like
awesome.
Look at those small things.
I love that because so much of eating disorders and disorders in general can be about perfectionism, right?
Yeah.
So, if I can't get it right and I don't eat perfectly all day, then screw it, I might as well have a pizza and a box of ice cream. So, not that I've ever done that. Anyways, thank you so much for being on Talk Recovery today. It was really awesome, and I hope someone's out there and was encouraged by the message, and we will get to our last song.
Yeah, thanks. Both our guests, Freddie Negretti, calling up from California, and Cassia for coming in today, sharing your story. I mean, that's the thing. A lot of the times, where do we go? You know, like for these disorders, diseases, whatever we want to call them or label them, a lot of the times they're just symptoms of some unchecked, unresolved things going on, emotions, you know, undealt with, lack of coping skills. And so when somebody can sit here alive, breathing, and say, this is what I've done, and I'm not, you know, all day on medication, zombied in my bed, you know, to fix this disorder, like I'm living my life. It's a beautiful thing. Thanks again for coming in.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
And we're going to give another homage to our late, great Gord Downey. This is the Tragically Hip. Long time running. Enjoy your weekend.